So today we will build a unique synthesizer in the grid, build around the idea of wave splicing. This is what it sounds like. As always, I added the ideas from this video to the PDF of tips and tricks I keep on updating. It's available on my Patreon together with the project file from this video and from many other videos. So this synth setup is inspired by the recombination engine UREC module from Future Sound Systems and by the Spice Factory VCVREC module by Venom, and again it's built around the so-called wave splicing technique. So let's really start building this setup. We will need two oscillators, and I would like to be able to morph between waveforms. So I will use two wavetable modules. And a nice feature here is that one oscillator is unipolar positive and the other is unipolar negative. So they sort of complete each other. Now for the unipolar positive, we can just use a by2 uni module. Let me show you this also on the scope here. Right, so now we have a unipolar positive waveform. And for the unipolar negative, again, we will use another by2 uni, so bipolar to unipolar, but then we will also invert it with the invert module, and then we have unipolar but negative. And the idea here is to crossfade between them at audio rates. So we will use the blend module. Let me take this out here for a second. Right, we will use the blend module, blend one the positive and once the negative. Let's send this also here to the scope, and you can see we have again a bipolar signal. To the left, unipolar positive, to the right, unipolar negative, and then we have here in the center more or less a bipolar signal. And I will use also an envelope here so I can play this, right, an AR envelope. And I will use my MIDI keyboard here to play this voice. Right, and already just by changing the waveforms and the blend, we already get interesting results. Right, and again, because one is positive, unipolar, and one is negative, unipolar. Right, so you get interesting waveforms. And now again, we need a way to crossfade between them at audio rates. And for this, we will use another wavetable oscillator or wavetable module, and this we will use to modulate the blend. So we need here the modulator out and then map this to the blend at about let's say about 100 or maybe 50, right, something like this. And now with this wavetable oscillator, I would like to have even more wave shaping. So what we can do, we can take this oscillator and change it to 0 frequency, so now it's not running, and we can drive it with a phaser, so with a phase signal through the phase input, set it to 100%, so now we have exactly the same result. Maybe I can show you this on another scope here. Right, so now we have the same wave, but we can wave shape it even more with something like the formant module. Right, place it in between the phaser and the wavetable, and now we have also sort of pulse width even. Right, we can do this also to other shapes. Right, you see we have even pulse width modulation. And now it's all about the wave shapes and the tuning of the oscillators, right, to get really interesting results. So let me show you this. Right. I can take this maybe an octave down. Right, you can see here the wave shape also. We can even add here, because we are using the wavetable modules, we can add even unison. Now another interesting thing we can do is we can decouple the incoming pitch from the two oscillators, right, from the positive and the negative. Just turn off the pre-chord, the pitch pre-chord, so now they don't follow incoming note changes. but we can then sync them to the main switching oscillator just by connecting it to the retrigger input here, and now they will follow the pitch, but we have another way to change the timbre. Let me bring this back for a second, and now in the VCV version, let me show you another thing here. Right, in the VCV module, we have also individual outputs for the positive and the negative, and also phase modulation, dedicated phase modulation inputs. Right, so we can also do something like this in Bitwig with the lookup module. So in data, we have here, for example, a saw, a sine, and a triangle. Now we have to drive them. They will not do anything by themselves, but we have to drive them with a phasor signal. So again, I will use another phasor here, right? And this will be for the positive, and I just duplicate this. It will go here down to the negative, and we can cross modulate, right, the phase. So for example, here I can use a sine to modulate the second, the negative oscillator. Right, and maybe a saw to modulate the positive. Right, and this is the basic setup, but let me show you the final patch with the controls and everything. And this is how it looks like. It's more or less the same setup, but just a bit more organized. Right here we have the positive VCO, the negative. Here we have the splicer. I added also a few modules here. For example, I added an octaver for the oscillator, so it's easy to just change their octaves. And also a toggle to toggle between sync and unsynced. Right, also a mixer here for the phase modulation, so you can mix different modules for modulating the phase. And you don't even have to look at this patch. I can close it, and we have all of the controls here. I set up macro controls. Of course, I saved it also as a preset. Right, we have here the splice section, we have the positive section, the negative section, and here we have the envelope. And I added also a filter. I wanted to have this synthesizer more or less complete also with a filter. So there is a high pass going through some distortion or saturation, and then from there to a low pass, again with all of the controls here. Right, so let's really see what it sounds like. Right, I can change the splice shape. We have here PWM, the octave. Right, we have levels here also for the positive and negative. So let's concentrate just on the positive. Right, adding unison. Right here we have the phase modulation. Can add some reverb to this just for fun. Right, and then we can bring in, let's concentrate now just on the negative. Right, maybe take out the, let me bring this back for a second, take out the pitch tracking and sync it. This is what I wanted to do. Right, so this is now just the negative without pitch tracking but synced. Right, so I can tune it, change its shape, add unison, add phase modulation. Listen to this sound. Right, and of course we can also modulate everything. So if I open here, for example, the modulation for the track, I can add, for example, random modulation, smooth, maybe unipolar for the sine, phase modulation here. Right, and again we have the envelope, we have the high pass with resonance, low pass, drive, and the drive is set up so it's bringing up the drive but also taking down the level a bit. Right, so you can bring in drive without worrying about making this too loud. So again, everything is here on the panel. You don't even have to look on the patch, and this creates quite interesting sounds. I have here a few examples. For example, a pad here, unlike in hardware, we can have in Bitwig this voice also polyphonic. So I have it playing a few voices of polyphony. Let me play this. Right, with lots of modulation. I wanted to have the modulation also polyphonic, so I kept it here on the device itself. Right, but it's the same setup, the same synth, just polyphonic. I have here also a sequence. Right, with modulation on the low pass. Let me stop the pad for a second. Right, and then a bass. Right, all of this from the same setup, from the same synth. And then even some effects. So here I don't have the pitch tracking on. You can see I'm modulating the tuning of everything just for a nice weird effect. Right, it sounds like this together. Right, and this is all from the same setup, from the same synthesizer. There are lots of things you can do with it. I have here a few more voices before I bring them in. I hope you enjoyed this video. Once again, consider joining us on Patreon. Cheers!